12-step programs came to mind for me as well, because in 12-step groups, they often say that addiction is a family illness, so they recognise that if one person is addicted, it affects everybody in the family in the same way that if somebody is pregnant and has an abortion, it affects everybody in the family. And I think when there is secrecy like that, you're right that telling kids too early can be damaging and isn't really advisable.
Yeah.
But when they're adults and they learn, Mum had an abortion when, I never knew about it. It makes sense of so much. So when the secret is let out, as it were, in a loving way, woundedness happens often relationally, but healing happens relationally too.
Hello. Today we're going to be looking at the theme of March for Life this year, which is abortion hurts the family. Now, with me to discuss this theme, we've got two wonderful guests who might be familiar to you. We've got Rachel McKenzie from the post-abortive ministry Rachel's Vineyard. And we've also got Greg Nolan, you might know as the Catholic psychotherapist. Greg helps out on Rachel's Vineyard retreats, as well as having your own private practice, don't you, Greg?
Yes, I do, yeah.
Okay, brilliant. So let's look at where to start with this. I think maybe a good place to start would be just by looking at the fact that we're often told, abortion is my body, my choice. It's a very personal, individual decision, and it affects no one but me. Now, clearly, as pro-lifers, we know it very much affects the baby, but this theme is broadening that out a lot more, isn't it? So how does it affect the family then Greg?
I think the first thing to do is to just sort of set the scene, really. Like you said, as pro-lifers, that we know that it affects the family, but even psychology in general knows that people don't exist in isolation. We exist relationally, so all human beings are fundamentally relational. So when something as significant as pregnancy happens in a family, for example, it isn't just the woman that's affected. The pregnancy, in a sense, automatically creates multiple relationships within the system of the family. So this is well known to psychology, and there's lots of modalities of psychology and psychotherapy that very much take on this idea and work from this idea that we engage in families as a system, that families are emotional systems, psychological systems. So if something very significant happens to one person in the family, it de facto affects everybody else in the family. I remember when my wife was pregnant with our first child, and we told my wife's parents that she was pregnant, and both my mother-in-law and father-in-law were in tears of joy when we told them the news, which is a very natural thing. Yeah. And I think we all recognise that, like if my siblings have told me they're expecting a baby, I'm like, well, I'm going to be an uncle. Do you know what I mean? So there's a very natural human response to pregnancy, but to anything significant in our lives, really, anything significant doesn't just affect the individual. It affects everybody the individual is related to in any sense, be it a friend or parent, grandparent, Yeah, I think it's actually a really sad statement to think that it's just about me and just my decision. It's actually a very kind of lonely thing to say. Do you think that how you are doesn't affect anyone else? It's very unhealthy. It's a mantra. So the whole "my body, my choice" is a mantra that's in society, and the effect of any mantra is to condition the way a person thinks. So if we say "my body, my choice" 1,000 times a day throughout the world, we're training people to think in a very unhealthy individualistic sense that doesn't reflect reality, actually. So it's a detachment from our humanity and the way God made us. So it's just not a real way of thinking about things, I would say.
Yeah, and the mother is a very integral part of a family unit, isn't she? So if, like you're saying, if she is affected in any way by abortion, that's going to have a huge ripple effect through that family. The heart of the home.
Yeah, for sure. So
wounded.
I'm sure we'll get on to talk about this a little bit later on, but if children are raised in a household where the mother, who's the heart of the home, is broken-hearted, the children feel it. If you think in terms of attachment theory, if you think in terms of systemic therapy, the thing is, it's so well known. It almost shouldn't. It shouldn't need saying, but it does need saying because the mantra of "my body, my choice" has been so persuasive in society. But it's sort of ludicrous. Really, it doesn't make much sense.
So if we're looking at how the damage that abortion does to a woman affects the family unit, then bringing you in, Rachel. I know you've been telling me more about this, and I've heard testimonies myself about how abortion affects men. If the man is affected, does that then affect the family unit as well, or the relationship? Abortion wounds men too, doesn't it?
Absolutely. Like when Greg just said, that the mother is the heart of the family. And the father's role in a family is to be the protector. It's like St. Joseph protecting the Holy Family, protecting the mother. And when that role, again, is fractured, it has a huge impact on everybody. So very often, people are always shocked, and the amount of times I have to say men come on retreat, especially fathers. We have an awful lot of fathers that come. And they're really wounded. They're wounded because they didn't protect the family when they came out with coercive statements. If you don't have this abortion, then I'm leaving. Or if they've been a little bit more subtle and turned around and said, well, I'll leave the decision up to you, as if all decisions are left with the mother. That it shouldn't be like that in the family.
Yeah.
And then, there's also a group of men that came that very much like Anhill didn't feel like he had a voice. He couldn't speak up because of his own wounds, and wounded people wound. Yeah. And then there's another section of men that come to Rachel's Vineyard, the fathers that never know, and how broken they are, because for them, they just really wanted to be a father. They wanted to, have that role, and that role was stripped away from them. They didn't even know about the pregnancy. Yeah. When you look at P.O. and others like him that have come.
Yeah, and those, of course, are all testimonies that are on the March for Life website.
Exactly.
And a lot of them really reflect, the powerlessness that sometimes men can experience, particularly if they're only told afterwards and there's absolutely nothing they can do. But often that feeling, because the law is saying it's a woman's decision, that often is what they're interioralising themselves, isn't it? I mean, I don't know if that's anything that men have ever expressed to you in any way, Greg? Or? It's
a big theme, so... excuse me. It's a big theme, I guess, for fathers, maybe in particular. I don't know, the powerlessness because of exactly that. So, again, the mantra in society is it's a woman's issue, it's a woman's choice. I've been told I remember having a conversation in a pub about 20 years ago about this very thing, and a woman said to me, you don't have the right to speak about this, you're a man. Do you know what I mean? So this is very much in society, and it's damaging, it's societally damaging, but when you see men who feel completely powerless, Rachel has talked about the role as well, like there's a very strong recognised phenomenon in psychology of role transition. If your role changes very fast, unexpectedly, that's super hard to process and to navigate and to negotiate. So to go from I'm having a baby to I'm not gonna be a father, which is obviously not the real way of saying it anyway, but to have your role taken away, and again for grandparents, I'm gonna be a granny.
Yeah.
No, you are always a granny, you are always a father, but to take away the anticipated, what I'm going to do with this child, the hopes, the dreams, it's not just, and this is what I mean about the interwovenness, the relational nature of family systems. It's not just the loss of the baby, but it's all of the dreams and hopes and thoughts and plans and what's the little boy going to look like, what's you going to look, it's all of that, so...
Have you, Rachel, seen how it affects grandparents? And Greg was just
when Greg said that, I was just thinking immediately of the grandparents that have been to Rachel's Vineyard, and what, first of all, looks like a loving, kind gesture to their daughters by taking them for an abortion, because that's either what they wanted, or they thought, well, this is the best thing because they're too young, or whatever lie goes into our heads. That these grandparents really regret that decision and realise that, by paying for the abortion or taking them or not speaking up, that actually they played a part in this abortion, and the daughter very often has a resentment towards those, towards their mother, because it's like, well, why didn't you protect me? I came, even though I was telling you I want an abortion or whatever the scenario was. We always go to our mums for advice. You know, so for those grandparents, and then again, a bit like the fathers that didn't know, we do have grandparents that never knew. You know, I'm always saying, you know, my mum should go to Rachel's Vineyard because she never knew till it was far too late, decades down.
Yeah.
So it really does impact, you know, grandparents, but it impacts every single member of the family. You know, when I think about the siblings, the amount of siblings that come, and I think the wound that they very often bring up is they suddenly realise that the love that their mum or their dad had for them has got conditions. It's no longer, you know, unconditional love. It's just that I came at the right time, didn't I?
Okay. Yeah. And I think we're hearing more of the siblings recognising what that hurt is. You know, that I think sometimes there's a very sort of sense of a sort of disenfranchised grief, isn't it? Like I haven't. It's not my grief. So why am I hurting? You know. And I think helping somebody to realise that actually that is a legitimate grief to have. You know, you might have even never known that child on a personal level, but it is okay to grieve for them.
Yeah,
you know?
and I think they even grieve at the dinner table. They just know there should be another plate there. There should be another, you know what, everyone's sort of in the family, there's always 2 years, but there's this 4-year gap. Why is that? And that somebody is missing it. And it's always, well, maybe if they were here, my life would have been better in many respects. And I think actually it would have.
Yeah. Well, isn't that a great gift to give your child a brother or a sister, you know, and to feel that there's, you know, someone missing that important role. It must be really, really hard.
There can be survivor guilt as well, you know. So why is it that I survived and they didn't? You know, so guilt is a sort of transference of guilt onto the siblings. Isn't entirely uncommon either.
Yeah. I mean, I know, like you, Greg, and you as well, Rachel, that you know, I've been outside abortion centres and seen women or girls going in for an abortion accompanied by family members, and that just seems particularly sad.
Yeah, it's tragic.
You know, when it's the granny of the preborn child that's the one, and I've sometimes seen like a teenager kind of almost being frog marched by parents either side. Yeah. I remember one particular occasion when, you know, this is prior to buffer zones, when we'd be, you know, offering leaflets of help to those going in, and I remember one young girl actually saying, but I want a leaflet to her parents, and they were just absolutely not. You know, you're going in there. Yeah. And
I've seen that so many times. A friend of mine said I was frog marched in there by my mum and my boyfriend. You know what I mean? So it's so horrendous. It's ugly, but it's based on a lie as well. So if you think about relationships, the major part of any healthy relationship is love, right? And love can't be based on a lie. So when we assist people in taking them to the abortion clinic, it's like a lie has entered into the relationship. And when a lie is persists and is maintained in a relationship, that very often leads to a relationship breakdown, because you can't maintain it really with it. Like the two things that come to mind are, one is when there's a lie in a relationship, and the other is when there's secrecy, and they're two they're distinct problems, and they're difficult to negotiate in both ways. But when a lie exists between two people who love each other, and may well love each other, but the very presence of the lie that we did the right thing, or this was good for you, in itself is destructive to the relationship. And there's no escaping it. The whole, you know, individualism of the my body, my choice mantra is just, you know, not real, really.
Yeah. And then, of course, there's other family members, wouldn't there be? Like, you know, aunts, uncles, cousins. Do you ever have anyone in those sort of relationships on Rachel's Vineyard?
All those. I particularly remember one auntie. I was also thinking at the same time about, you know, when I had an abortion, I prevented my sister from being an auntie to children that were alive. Obviously, she's still an auntie. But, you know, she never got to spoil them. She never had, you know, she hasn't got any other siblings. So this was a one and only opportunity. Yeah. And actually recognising that today. But there was one woman that came on Rachel's Vineyard. It's a lovely story, and she doesn't mind me sharing it, that she came because she paid for her sister's abortion. She felt like, you know, my goodness, I've played a part in the grief and the hurt and the wounds of her sister, but also sort of how God got her there for that. But then on retreat recognised, oh my gosh, I've had an abortion myself, and she never even looked at that. Wow. So in some respects, she always says, oh, God tricked me there, in a really loving way, that, she could look first of all at what she'd done to her sister, but then was able to look at what she'd done to herself and her own child.
Yeah, and I know I've been at events with you, Rachel, when sometimes we've had somebody come up and talk to us, and they'll start by saying, oh, and their initial concern is maybe that they're sad about their brother or sister who's, been involved directly in abortion. And it's when you've said to them something like, you're an uncle, you're an auntie, and it's like a light bulb goes on, isn't it?
Yeah.
And I think that's when they kind of recognise that they're right to grieve, not just to be sad for their sister, or and again for grandparents, it's not just being sad for your daughter or your son, but actually recognising this is my grief too, and I have a right to be sad about this, and maybe even to feel angry and those kind of emotions as well about it, that helplessness that you couldn't do anything. And
exactly. I mean, you talked earlier about disenfranchised grief. The world tells us we're not allowed to grieve when it comes to abortion. But actually, my mum grieved for my children way before I ever did. Way before. Well, I was grieving because I was in denial for many years, but she openly grieved straight away. And I think that's really important for every family member to know. You are allowed to grieve because you haven't lost something, you've lost someone.
Right, yeah.
It's also that the grief is complicated, I would say. So in interpersonal therapy, one of the strong themes is complicated grief, and sometimes we do need to grieve, but we can't even get there because there's the I made this happen as well, so that very much complicates the grief. It's like, well, how can I even grieve when I made the decision to end the life of the baby?
Like I don't have a right to grieve, sort of thing.
Yeah, but for siblings too, it's like where do I put myself in relation to this? So complicated grief again leads to depression. It's a common cause of depression, complicated grief. So and it affects everybody in the family, everybody in the unit.
Yeah, you were just mentioning about your own experience, Rachel, because I know you've had abortions. When did you first realise that it didn't just affect you, that it actually impacted your family? And I mean, presuming that you feel it did.
Definitely. I think I recognised that before I recognised my own grief and my own pain. Wow. And it was through telling my mum. And I remember that I told my mum, I didn't want to, but I felt very much like I needed to because I was being blackmailed. And I thought it's best to come from me. So I just told her about one abortion. And I don't know whether it was when I was leaving the room or on the phone, but later on I stood by the way, there was two, because the number for me, it was irrelevant. I was really dehumanising my own children. It was my mum's reaction to that she was genuinely heartbroken. And she was genuine, but equally, I know she did a lot of her grieving behind the scenes because she wouldn't have wanted to make me feel bad. It's not that, and didn't want to she never made me ever feel guilty. She was really, really sensitive to that. So I think that was the first part. Obviously going to Rachel's Vineyard, because it was there I recognised I'm a mum. As you know, I've said many times that, I had abortions because I didn't want to be a mum, didn't solve the problem. I'm just a mum to children that I killed, that I know are now in heaven. But also, God has revealed my story very gently to me. And it was only a couple of years ago, I was at Youth 2000, this Catholic youth
weekend,
that's the word I'm looking for. Weekend. And at Youth 2000, they had some praise and worship, and this beautiful song called The Blessed. And in the song, the one line that's repeated over and over again, it's your children and your children and your children's children. And I suddenly just remember thinking, oh my gosh, not only is Jude and Paul not here today, but their children and their children and their children. I suddenly realised how many generations are not here. And then actually realising, I lost my chance to be a mother here, but I lost my chance to being a grandma and to be a great-grandma. And I just suddenly saw the magnitude of that.
Yeah, the generational impact isn't something that maybe we recognise quite so much. And all those people that, your children and children's children would have affected and interacted with and things as well. I think we kind of maybe don't realise the damage that can go through generations because of that, or the kind of what's missing, that people maybe won't have the relationships that God had planned for them because the children aren't there.
Yeah, exactly.
So what about we've talked about how abortions happen within the family. Do you see a lot of relationships breaking down through this, Greg? When anyone does it cause those sort of problems longer term? Whether that's maybe between couples who've had an abortion, can it have that kind of an impact on them?
I've certainly seen it. I think we both have, haven't we? So the relationships often break down following an abortion.
Right.
People say that the love was lost, the love died that day. Do you know what I mean? And so, yeah, it's something that I think we commonly see, really.
Yeah. And is that something that you can, would you recommend, I don't know, for instance, how would couples deal with that if they can feel, that relationship breaking down and aware of that?
I think it's really important that they come to Rachel's Vineyard where they can safely grieve and look at that experience, because what very often happens is when a couple come to Rachel's Vineyard and say the man says, their abortion was decades ago, and so, his story is, I never wanted to make my wife feel bad, so I've never told her that this affects me every day. And she's shocked to hear that because she just thought he didn't care. Okay. So actually, that they had an abortion that then brings silence, that brings death again into the relationship, and actually being able to speak in a safe environment. And also, very often men will come with the wives and go, I've only come here to support my wife. And it's like, well, you think that, but God just shines a light into their own wounds, and God can heal them. It's really good when they come together.
Mm-hmm. So you would recommend that them both
Definitely,
going to a Rachel's Vineyard?
Yeah.
But of course, I presume if one or the other of them wouldn't, it's still good just for that individual to go along and...
Absolutely. Yeah. And sometimes it's just, it's not practical. I've got children at home.
Okay.
But what is... really beautiful as well. He say the mother comes, and then on the Sunday when we have a memorial service, the father joins us for that, and that can very much be the beginning of their healing when they realise, there's all these people crying. I'm allowed to grieve.
Yeah. I know, Rachel, you often talk about how your secrets make you sick.
Yeah,
and
you're only as sick as your secrets.
Yeah, and when we're talking about the impact on the family, that can't but come to mind, the secrecy of abortion and how damaging that can be, so that even if people maybe don't know, they can feel that there's something that's being kept from them. Mm-hmm. And that lack of openness, that must eat into families,
Definitely, but I think it also there has to be a balance. I often have mothers say to me, I've been on retreat, I've got a 7-year-old daughter, or I've got a 14-year-old son. Do you think I should go home now and tell them? And it's always like, actually, no, it wouldn't be appropriate. That you can't just throw that sort of baggage on other people or that wound. That you've got to really discern when to say and when not. I know that in 12-step programs, very much in there is to make amends, but only if it's safe to do so.
Right.
And you wouldn't, and that includes yourself, that it isn't always safe for somebody to share with the whole family.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
12-step programs came to mind for me as well, because in 12-step groups, they often say that addiction is a family illness, so they recognise that if one person is addicted, it affects everybody in the family in the same way that if somebody is pregnant and has an abortion, it affects everybody in the family. And I think when there is secrecy like that, you're right that telling kids too early can be damaging and isn't really advisable.
Yeah.
But when they're adults and they learn, Mum had an abortion when, I never knew about it. It makes sense of so much. So when the secret is let out, as it were, in a loving way, woundedness happens often relationally, but healing happens relationally too. So when we grow together and love each other, and it's obviously one of the major healing elements of a Rachel's Vineyard retreat is relationship. It's relationship, right. It's love, it's loving relationships. So, yeah.
Yeah, actually, saying that I remember somebody sharing with me how they found out that their twin had been aborted, and they said that they'd almost worked that out themselves first because they just felt this missing person.
Yeah.
In such a sort of tangible way. And to start with, they used to kind of have like a pretend friend when they were younger, with imaginary friend, and thought, this is really normal. And as it got older, it just didn't go away. And it was only when they actually approached their parents and said, there's something missing, and the parent explained something.
And children are hypersensitive. Yeah. Children are the most empathic people in the world, I think. Like, I've got a 5-year-old and an 8-year-old, and they sense movements in the parents' moods. So I've heard adults say, "Well, I was born into a grieving family." Do you know what I mean? The kids can feel it. It's the ambience. It's the sort of air they breathe in a way, So
yeah, and when we were just talking about relational impact, and you're talking about how it affects the family. I know just a while ago I was talking to somebody who, had found out that their sibling had been aborted, and when talking to that person, they told me that also their mother had not only their mother but their grandmother had an abortion, and it doesn't seem to be that uncommon that abortions actually almost sort of go through families, like you're saying, those kind of family issues, whether it's, and I don't think that's unique to abortion. You'll sometimes find that certain addictions can run in family and things like that. I mean, is that common, something that you'd understand in psychology? And
yeah, well, it's certainly a learned behaviour, and we communicate our beliefs and the ethos to our children, but there's also a spiritual element there,
Okay.
So both psychologically and spiritually, I think these things are transmitted, but that's why healing and breaking that pattern is so powerful and so beautiful, because you can break generational patterns by receiving healing yourself and telling the truth and facing up to the truth and being set free. And that's why healing is so wonderful, because we can break generational patterns of death and darkness and pain.
So if it's not your own abortion, so maybe if we're talking about grandparents, for instance, what can be done? I mean, have you got any thoughts on how grandparents can help with that healing within a family?
So thinking about my own mum, the way she reacted when I told her that I'd had an abortion, and then later others, that her first reaction was she came round the table and she hugged me and she said, "You not know how much I love you." Oh, that never left me.
Yeah.
And also, but she also never watered it down. She never said, well, you didn't have a choice. And she didn't start building up loads of lies to make me feel better. She knew the gravity of it, and she was always so pro-life all her life. And so I knew, and in a really beautiful way, she was able to say, I love you. I also always knew that she had a heart for post-abortive women. Somebody very close to her had had an abortion, and she'd always be telling me, she never got over it, Rachel, she never got over it. And she had this heart, so I knew really at the back of my mind I could always tell my mum that I was never going to be met with rage or anger. And she also told me, you need God, you need Rachel's Vineyard. Mm-hmm. And she was met with anger and denial, and she never gave up. And she did that for about 7 years before I realised, actually, my mum's actually speaking the truth here. Mm-hmm. So it's truth and love together. Mm-hmm. Yeah. And I've seen that beautifully on retreats where mothers and daughters have come, and they've both owned their own blame pie. That, my mum played a part in this, but I played a part too. I mean, even my mum, in her story, she'd say, my mum owns that, and this is my mum saying this, not me. I've never pointed the finger. And she'll say, "Why couldn't you come to me? What was it about me that you couldn't come to me?" But it was nothing that she was doing. It was the lies that I believed. My mum will kill me. My mum never put a finger on me. Yeah. But then we've had really beautiful stories. One woman came on retreat quite recently, and she'd had an abortion in secrecy. So before she came, she wanted to tell her mum and dad. Before, she didn't want to go to Rachel's Vineyard. "Oh, I've got to go on a retreat and make up." It was a different kind of retreat. So she told them. And they just met her again with so much love, that when she did the memorial service, not only did she honour her own child, but she read out this card that her mum and dad had written, about their missing grandchild that's not here. And that just healed and broke every single one of us. It was just so beautiful. Yeah. And even when she, because it's quite hard for post-abortive people, like when my sister got pregnant, I had quite an adverse reaction to that, but I had to cover it up. So when she'd got family members that were having, a pregnant since, her mum and dad, most beautiful thing I've ever heard, came round to a house after they'd all heard the news, and gave her a teddy bear for the one grandchild, their first grandchild that's missing. So I think it's recognising the humanity and who is missing. And they can always have that open conversation now. And she's probably the most well-balanced person that's ever come to Rachel's Vineyard, because her family is so well-balanced as well. And she's just being met with love.
Yeah.
I think it's just in addition to that, like I know who you're talking about, I was on the same retreat, and a very striking part to this lady is that the depth of her faith, and you talked about needing God as well. And I think when we know the love of God, which is beneath all things, the love of each other is obviously healing, but we need to know that we're loved and forgiven by God as well. That's key, central.
Yeah. And I presume like this is all underpinned as well by just good communication, and that's kind of like at the heart of a lot of healing. That I know, like Rachel was just mentioning, her mum didn't know, this or that, or maybe felt that she should have said something or whatever it is. But then being able to communicate that and saying like, it wasn't you, it wasn't what you did or didn't do, and just having that open communication and a chance to kind of, even it might be difficult to have those discussions, that there's a healing aspect to it, isn't there?
Yeah, and it heals the damage that a secret, you're only as sick as your secrets, right? So it heals the damage that a secret inflicts, and it undoes the lies that are injected when we do things like this. Yeah.
So why do you think then that society is so reluctant to acknowledge or accept the sort of family damage of abortion?
There's many reasons. One certainly is that the abortion industry is massively lucrative, right? There's money to make. So keeping it, the my body, my choice mantra, again, it's a mantra, and mantras are religious things, in different religions have different mantras, like Christianity has the Jesus prayer, Hindus have various mantras. And if you can engender this sense, it's only you, it's your choice, it's only you, it's your choice, and it's repeated 1,000 times a day in 1,000 different ways, there's a lot of money to be made, right? So the abortion mill keeps going, basically. That's just one reason. There's dozens of reasons, really.
Any thoughts on that, Rachel?
I just think that, like you said about the whole my body, my choice, but the world doesn't want us to know that, again, every time you have an abortion, you haven't lost something, you've lost someone, so you are allowed to grieve. They don't want to look at that because, again, it's going to affect the abortion industry. And we do live, unfortunately, in quite a secular world, that, any quick fix is fine.
Yeah. That denial is behind a lot of it, isn't it? That we can't admit that there's grief, because if we admit grief, what or who are we grieving?
And it's ludicrous, because you've got, it's just a blob of cells, and you look on the NHS website and you go from pregnancy to abortion, that, abortion, it's suddenly, the end of a pregnancy. It's not the end of a life. But if somebody had a miscarriage, and people are openly grieving when they've had a miscarriage, you wouldn't say, but it was only a blob of cells. And that's why even the government now have got certificates of life, to recognise the humanity of a miscarriage, but not an abortion. And we both know, a friend of ours that's had an abortion that went and got a certificate, place of death, and and she put Mary Stopes or whatever
or
the
place.
Exactly. And it was
centre.
just like
I mean, in a way, I guess that's a sign of a very sick society, isn't it? That is in such denial.
And I think that the central point has been stated, which is that if we acknowledge that this is the end of a human life, we're acknowledging responsibility and guilt, actually, and that's the thing that, to acknowledge, that's so massive. And again, we need the love of God to be able to do that, to recognise the gravity of what an abortion is. I like, without God, I don't know how you'd do it, really, so.
Yeah. And that's why, obviously we need sort of safe spaces like Rachel's Vineyard that can be a really good place to kind of begin to take maybe some ownership or just to look at the issue, through the eyes of truth, as well as the eyes of love.
And that's after the fact, but even what what March for Life does, what we're doing here, just talking about the reality of what abortion is, talking about the fact that it isn't just my body, my choice. It's, my husband's baby, it's my brother's nephew, for example, and just acknowledging that reality. It's my mum's grandchild. Just using that language to bring reality back into the situation before it happens, because the best case is to inform people properly before they make that decision,
Yeah, and just, you just mentioned that. I just guess language is a very important part of this theme of abortion hurts the family, and I know it's been mentioned by both of you a few times, that not only we would very much recognise that a mother is still a mother, even if she aborts her child. Mm-hmm. The same for grandparents, aunties. It's not a case of, you would be or you might be in the future or you've lost the chance. Once that child is conceived, the auntie is still the auntie, even if that child dies. The same with all those other family relationships. And I think it's just important for us to understand that and appreciate that and make sure we use the right language for it as well. Mm-hmm.
I think what you said earlier as well, because what will be given rise to is grief, but it will be anger as well. It'll be so complicated. There'll be so much there, So, and it's just not being blindsided by that. That's okay. It's okay that we feel angry about it. It's okay that we're sorrowful. It's okay that it's terrified. It's okay to feel all of those things.
Yeah. I mean, I can imagine there must be a lot of frustration, particularly if we're talking about the wider family, because there's often a sense of powerlessness. I mean, sometimes if we know beforehand, we can say something or can do something. But I know when you've talked about situations where we don't find out till afterwards, and that's often the case, that people will, maybe find the courage 10 years later to say something. That can be a really frustrating thing to think, I wish I'd known. I could have said something or done something,
It's the if only, it's the bargaining stage.
But not to feel that you've got to kind of live in that you can move forward and find some healing from it. So
absolutely. There's always hope. There's always, you haven't got to carry, we always say this, don't we? You haven't got to carry this grief any longer.
Yeah.
You can come to Rachel's Vineyard. Greg always says, and it's so true, we're not meant to grieve alone.
Yes.
And what a great place to grieve and a safe place than Rachel's Vineyard.
Mm-hmm.
So bringing this to a close, then Rachel, if you could say something, what would you say to someone who's listening, who is maybe in the wider family of someone who's had an abortion, maybe the grandparent, whoever it might be, anything you could say to them?
You have the right to grieve. I think as simple as that. You have the right to grieve. Come and grieve at Rachel's Vineyard.
Brilliant. And Greg, what would you say is important to the community to understand in processing, the grief of abortion? Why is community so important in this? Because that's what we're talking about, like the wider community. Why is that so important in processing abortion grief?
Because what I said earlier, which is that we heal relationally, so we heal in love. And love is the key, which is why God is the key. I don't even like talking about God in that in those terms, right? But we need love in order to heal. So we need each other. And I see it time after time at Rachel's Vineyard retreats. One of the things that participants say is there's so much love here, and that they sometimes say it doesn't feel like it's in the world, but it is here. And they oftentimes don't want to leave the retreat because they feel so loved and so held, essentially. So it feels like a big step. It feels frightening to even recognize the gravity again of what an abortion is. But I'd say just take courage and walk forward. There is healing there. There is help. There is hope. There is love. God is with us. All things are restored. We don't need to live in fear and darkness.
Amen to all of that. Thank you both so much. And that's left me with a lot to think about, but in a really positive way. So thank you both for joining me today.
Thank you.
Thank you.